Welcome to Tantallon Castle.
Tantallon Castle was the last of the great medieval castles to be built in Scotland, as by this time smaller tower houses were being preferred. One large curtain wall was built between two cliff faces, creating the large medieval castle we see today. In 1346, William Douglas, nephew of Robert the Bruce's companion James Douglas, had returned to Scotland from France to claim his inheritance as chief of the Douglas clan. He did this by murdering his godfather, Sir William Douglas of Liddesdale. He became the undisputed head of the family and was created Earl of Douglas in 1358. It appears that Douglas built the present castle around the time of his peerage to reflect his newfound status. The castle was intended as a status symbol and followed the medieval curtain wall type that was becoming out of fashion in favour of smaller tower houses. The barony of North Berwick surrounded the castle, but the castle remained with the earldom of Fife, and despite their claims, the castle passed outright to the Douglas family and was inherited by George Douglas, the illegitimate son of the Earl of Douglas. He also inherited his mother's earldom of Angus in 1389. This was the start of the division in the House of Douglas. Archibald the Grim became the head of the main line called the Black Douglases, and George Douglas was the progenitor of the Red Douglases. In 1397, George Douglas married Princess Mary Stuart, who was the daughter of King Robert III, allying the Red Douglases with the Royal House of Stuart. The third Earl of Angus made Tantallon his main residence and was in rebellion from 1443 until his death. He raided the Black Douglases' lands of Abercorn, leading to retaliation and his forfeiture in 1446, a few months before he died. In 1452, James II granted Tantallon to the 4th Earl of Angus, who was brother to the 3rd Earl, and led the royal force that defeated the Black Douglases at the Battle of Arkingholm in May 1455. The Red Douglases, led by the now 5th Earl Archibald Bell the Cat, turned against the royal house in 1482, and in 1490 he struck a treasonable deal with Henry VII of England against James IV of Scotland. On the 11th of October 1491, James IV besieged the castle. However, Angus submitted and the castle suffered minimal damage. By 1493, Angus was back in favour and was Chancellor of Scotland. In 1514, Archibald Douglas married James IV's widow, Margaret Tudor, daughter of Henry VII, and became Regent of Scotland for her infant son, James V. The couple tried unsuccessfully to take James to England, which sparked a civil war. In 1525, Angus, with the support from Henry VIII, staged a coup d'etat, taking custody of the young king, but in 1528, at the age of 16, James V escaped and upon joining his mother at Stirling, pronounced Angus attainted, banishing him to the north of the Spey. Instead, Angus retreated to the castle, then to England. The castle was seized by the king. However, Angus managed to return and refortify the castle. On the 23rd of October 1528, King James laid siege to the castle, but although his cannons bombarded it for 20 days, he could not get them close enough to do substantial damage due to the deep outer ditch. The king lifted the siege and returned to Edinburgh. At this point, Angus counterattacked and captured the king's artillery. Angus fled again to England, leaving Simon Penango in charge. He made terms with the king and the castle was retained until his death. Angus returned and recovered it. After a period of peace, Tantallon again saw military action during the Bishop Wars in 1639. The Douglas family had remained Catholic after the Scottish Reformation, incurring the wrath of the Presbyterian Covenanters who opposed Charles I's attempts to interfere with the Scottish Church. In 1639, the Covenanters captured the castle while William, newly created Marquis of Douglas, was in Edinburgh. In 1650, during the Third English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell's parliamentarian forces invaded Scotland, taking control of the south of Scotland in September after their victory at Dunbar. In February 1651, Cromwell's lines of communication were under attack from a small group of royalists based in Tantallon Castle. The group was led by Alexander Seton and only numbered 91 men. Despite this, Cromwell sent a force of 2,000 to 3,000 men under the command of General Monk. They also brought all the artillery they had in Scotland and started the siege of the castle. Seton was ennobled by Charles II as Viscount of Kingston on February the 14th during the siege. After 12 days of bombardment with cannon, a breach was made in the Douglas Tower. The defenders were compelled to surrender after quarter was given to them in recognition of their bravery. The siege of Tantallon Castle was also interesting as the Commonwealth forces were supported by the Commonwealth Navy. The ruins of Tantallon were sold in 1699 to Sir Hugh Dalrymple, who also owned the barony of North Berwick. Dalrymple allowed the castle to decay and to a certain extent was quarried for stone. In 1944, German radars were moved to the castle and aided in the training of the 617 Squadron, also known as the Dam Busters.